Thank you. Thank you and welcome to today's DCJ Daily Press Conference. It's a joint initiative between Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, Asian People's Movement for Debt and Development, War on Want, and Power Shift Africa. Where I come from in the rich UK, which got rich off fossil fuels and slavery, as well as violent plunder, private corporations, energy companies made £420 billion last year, 1 year alone. At the same time, many pensioners have the vile choice of heating their homes or eating. And this is just in the rich global north, in one of the richest countries in the world. We're finally seeing in the north structural adjustment policies which were first savagely unleashed on populations in the global south. For this reason, we are delighted to support this initiative by TUED and the aforementioned organizations. And I'll first pass over to my comrade Sean McSweeney from TUED to contextualize.
Thanks, Leon. So a brief word, first of all, about Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. It's a network of unions that was formed 12 years ago because we weren't convinced, in fact, we were very unconvinced that there was an energy transition actually happening. So 12 years later, we see the same trends unfolding. We're not seeing a transition in the way that this venue imagines. We're seeing an energy expansion with record use of fossil fuels growing alongside renewable forms of energy. So we spent several years critiquing that assessment and saying one of the main reasons why this was happening was because of an over-expectation of investment by the private sector. Private sector is not showing up in terms of its investment capabilities. Now, there are reasons for that. We don't have time to go into it, but it's particularly obvious in the case of the Global South. For every $5 invested in so-called green economy, only $1 comes to the South. And it's usually in the form of concessional loans, which add more debt to the countries of the South. So the growth of the network has been particularly strong in South countries, and we've launched a project called TUED South, so it's tuedglobal.org, I think, and we've set up this initiative and brought unions who are not able to get to the COP for obvious reasons. Many unions from the South want to be here, but they can't get here because of resources, etc. And they have put forward a statement, which I think is one of the most powerful trade union statements we've seen in recent times. It supports the ITUC's top-line goals of a just transition and workers' rights, but we really want and fight for a policy shift towards what we call a public pathway approach, where public ownership of energy is reclaimed, it's planned, and the transition to a low-carbon energy future becomes much more feasible on the basis of public finance. Last point I would make, there's no point in increasing public finance if that finance is packaged in ways that go straight into the pockets of multinationals and private investors. We need to rebuild public assets so they can do the important work that's required in terms of meeting the Paris targets, but also leading to a clean, low-carbon energy system for everybody with affordable energy. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Leon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, for that overview. I'm going to hand now to Julius Canguilhet, the Vice President of the Federation of Free Workers in Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Julius. I'm a trade unionist. I come from the Philippines, a country that has just been visited by 6 storms in 4 weeks. At least 233 lives, 58,034 houses, 11.2 billion in infrastructure and 5.9 billion in agriculture have been swept and blown away by the storms. And with enterprises stopping operations, leaving devastated workers and their families behind. Without work, there are no wages. With their livelihoods gone, they would have no means to survive. The COP29 negotiations has been billed as the climate COP. Everyone expects that through the new collective quantified goals, the Global South, which includes countries like the Philippines, would have a steady source of funds to recuperate from disasters and provide social protection and eventual reemployment. But no. The negotiations have stalled, and the Global North has refused to commit $5 trillion to the Global South. The Global North remains the main stumbling block for an ambitious NCQG. They are proposing the incorporation of private financing at the core while trying to eliminate public financing. But we will push back hard in the last few days of negotiations to make them pay up. For centuries, superpowers of the Global North have extracted the resources of the Global South. And multilateral development banks and onerous trade regimes dictated by imperialist powers have made sure of this. They have enriched themselves while pushing us to poverty. They have institutionalized a system that will reinforce this inequality. The Global North has made the world dependent on fossil fuels and on the toils of our labor. I am a trade unionist. I come from a country that has been experiencing unprecedented climate disasters. I come from a planet which is doomed to die unless the Global North starts paying up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julius. I'd like to now welcome Ernest Ndome from the Kenya Electrical Trades and Allied Workers Union, as well as the National Center, the Central Organization of Trade Unions, Kenya. Thank you, Ernest.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. As introduced, I come from Kenya. I represent the Electricity Workers Union. And at the same time, I hold the position of Assistant First Secretary General. So I'm here also to echo the sentiments of my colleagues on the need for climate finance. But even as we do that, I think it's important to put some issues in perspective. You will agree with me, there's a lot of abundance of solar, wind, rather green energy. There's a lot of potential in Africa. Unfortunately, we are now talking of almost 700, a whooping 700 million people are not accessible to electricity. And shockingly, a country like Spain, it has more solar power than the entire of Africa. It's really a contradiction, total contradiction. It's not that we don't have the resource is there, but the challenge is the resources to tap this, to turn around this resource now to green energy. So ideally, what we are saying is that this climate finance should be grants. We do not want loans. We will want grants that will clear the debts, the utilities. We have a big challenge in Africa because of the World Bank and the IMF policies that were imposed on us in earlier 1990s, where when we had shortage of power, the World Bank and IMF are to bring in what now we are calling independent power producers. The independent power producers, ideally maybe, the earlier intention might have been noble, but in the long run the issue is, did it serve its purpose? It didn't at all, because the independent power producers have gone ahead now to make life difficult. Cost of electricity is damn expensive in Africa because of lopsided agreements, power purchase agreements that were entered into by our countries and these particular institutions. So the whole narrative that was being pushed by IMF and the World Bank, that private institutions will invest, will alleviate the poverty in Africa, I think is a total lie. It has not worked. So what we are saying as trade union, we are championing for social dialogue on climate action. And when we are talking about social dialogue on climate action, we are saying we want to be part and parcel of the discussion. We want to participate in the decision making. And when we do that, we'll now be able to push the issues of decent work agenda, we'll be able also to push for a just transition where we are able to make sure that this particular financing that comes in, because ideally I'm happy that I'm just from a meeting of TUED where one of the speakers has just come in from Tunisia, and he came out very strongly, and I picked it, that the kind of grants that we want for Africa for climate action is not ideally to address issues of climate change. We are barely contributing 4% of emissions. So what we want is development finance. What we want is grants that will clear debts. We have utilities in Africa that decided to move to green energy, clean energy, and they are now in debts. So this particular financing that is there, we will want it also to address that. Otherwise, I think I'll stop there as we continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernest. Finally, we have Sol Class from Public Services International, Latin America.
Thank you. Hello, I am Sol Class from Argentina on behalf of PSI Interamerica. Well, the trade unions of Global South, representing millions of workers, defend a model of public energy service because we believe that energy is a fundamental human right and an essential public good for sustainable development and social justice. A public energy system allows for public investment in infrastructure for the fulfillment of public service over profit is therefore essential. Public management of energy ensures fair and stable rates for the population, and public projects will lower interest rates, making the transition much less expensive. Promoting transparency and accountability. In a public system, energy management is subject to public control and more transparent democratic control mechanisms. Driving the energy transition. A public service can lead investments in renewable energy, modernize the electricity grid, and ensure a just transition for workers, their organizations, and their communities. We cannot afford to leave investment decisions to private interests. Strengthening national sovereignty. Public control of energy projects releases the country's energy resources from foreign exploitations and guarantees independence in strategic decision-making. In our American continent, we value the case of Mexico with a successful struggle to reverse the privatization of the energy sector as an inspiring example for the Global South. Despite opposition from multinational companies and governments and private capital, Mexico has defended the importance of a public energy system to guarantee national sovereignty, universal access to energy, and a just energy transition. Mexico is increasing, not decreasing, the role of its public energy companies, which is very promising from a climate perspective. We urge countries to defend energy as a public good and to strengthen public energy services. Only through public, democratic, and transparent control can we ensure fair, sustainable energy at the service of human development. We call this the public pathway, for us, El Camino Público, to energy transition, and we believe it will make best use of climate finance while helping to ensure a truly just transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sol, and I'm very pleased to also invite Rhoda Boateng from the International Trade Union Confederation Africa.
Good morning to everyone, and sincere apologies for arriving late to such an important press conference. For Africa, the question around a public pathway to energy transition cannot be debated. African countries are faced already with very high debts. And this is why, for us, the question around privatization and the new forms of financing of climate is a problem. We urgently need to define a public pathway to our energy transition where the public where countries can define how they want this transition to happen. The new forms of financial architecture that we see today, which is the JETPs, is in no form servicing or providing the needed transition that we need for our countries. The forms of financing that are coming in the forms of loans are already compounding or are compounding the existing debts that our countries are faced with, and therefore we are calling on countries to refrain from loans and provide any forms of financial assistance through grants. A recent study that has been conducted on the financing that has come to South Africa, for instance, shows that the huge part of the financing is actually in the forms of loans, and this is in no form helpful to the country. We are therefore calling on parties in COP29 to ensure that any decisions or any resolutions that would be taken in the forms of financing should actually be or adopt a public pathway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhoda. Do we have any questions from the room with priority given to media and press colleagues? Yes, please.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for delivering a very strong statement. As you said, this is one of the strongest trade union statements in recent years, especially on climate justice. I would just like to ask, what are the 100 trade unions who signed this statement going to do to forward these demands? And the broader question, what is the larger trade union movement going to do with the issues of climate justice, just transition, and energy democracy? Thank you.
Thank you. I invite anyone from the panel.
I'd be more than happy to answer that. Thank you for your question. I think that what we're working on is not a list of demands. These unions have been working now for years, developing an alternative policy framework, which is based on public financing, which in terms of public entities can borrow at lower interest rates. This is a huge obstacle to any investment in low carbon energy and climate solutions. So we have to deal with that question. We cannot have what we call green structural adjustment. If we look at the packages of climate finance, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, for example, they come with explicit conditions. Privatize or they don't use the word privatize anymore because it's controversial these days given its horrific record. But what they do talk about is an enabling environment for the private sector. And that means basically miring the public utilities into debt, buying from private corporations at high prices, which then in turn lowers the popular support for an energy transition. So this is a key question. So what we're doing in the future is we're developing programmatic commitments, policy analysis. I want to draw attention in my final point to what Saul from Public Services International said about the experience of Mexico. So bad was the experience with the independent power producers in renewable energy that they canceled the contracts. They are now doing a public pathway approach towards renewables and dealing with rebuilding the public utility to play that role. So we're very encouraged by that development, and we're having a conference in Mexico in early February to reinforce those messages.
Thank you, Sean. I think Julius would like to come in on this question as well.
Well, there are a lot of learnings from COP29, and what we'll be doing, for example, in the case of the Philippines, When we go home, we will be reconvening the Workers for Just Transition, which we have just established in Manila, and make sure that financing doesn't go the public-private partnership path. We want to learn from Mexico. They have successfully renationalized power in countries like the Philippines. Power generation is completely in the hands of the private sector. And it would be great if through the learnings we got from COP29, we'll be able to establish stronger movements that will call for greater accountability at home. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a good question, but it's also good just to share the extent to which these private entities have really taken advantage of in the energy sector. And I'll give an example in Kenya, where the independent power producers signed a power purchase agreement running for almost 30 years. And that has put us in a fix where the parliament, the leaders in Kenya have tried to hold the government accountable. But you'll find that the government is in an awkward position because these contracts were signed, entered into, and they must have with their full cost, they have to hand. So ideally, this is where we are. And as Labour also, we are trying as much as possible to make sure that these particular contracts are not renewed again, because the cost of power has gone up because of the tariff that was signed by these independent power producers. So for now, interestingly, in Kenya, there's been a push by IMF to have the distribution component be privatized. But we are happy for the first time, the World Bank has come out strongly and said, the moment you allow private players to participate in distribution of power, it will mean that the cost of power will go up, because currently citizens that are based in far-flung areas are their power is overly subsidized by the government. So by allowing in private players, that means they will have to bear the cost of high electricity, and then also the utility that is debt-ridden will not have the capacity to pay its debts. So this is a scenario that we are, and we are happy about it. So ideally, the whole thing is we need to keep off private players in the energy sector. What we are saying also as Labour is that private let the financing, climate financing be channeled to public institutions so that we get rid of private players in the energy sector. Thank you.
thank you very much. Do you have a contribution at the end, Rhoda? Or
Well, just rounding up. Across Africa, I think the experience has been right back from the structural adjustment programs. Privatization hasn't served the people. We've seen huge impacts on the economies where we lost a lot of factories, and I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And so for us, as it's important that as we define new forms of climate finance, we ensure that this is for the people, and especially for a continent as Africa that is heavily faced with huge energy poverty, it's important that this responds also to access to energy for the people. And so importantly, decisions that are taken under the NCQJs should ensure that financing is really serving the interests of the people. For countries and for continents coming from the global south that have contributed very minimally to the climate crisis and do not have the means to really respond to the adaptation needs.
Thank you very much. I think that's a brilliant note to end on, and it's clear, I think, from our esteemed guests that the money is there. We've heard that from a range of sources and a range of reports, but it must be directed towards public pathways, and we must end the unjust and inefficient privatization model which denies billions the right to genuinely renewable energy and a dignified life. We'd like to thank the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice for this support with this press conference, and our speakers will be available to take further questions at the end outside the room. Thank you.